Hi, I'm Nathan Crowley. I'm a production designer. You might have seen my work on films like Interstellar, Dark Knight, Westworld, and today we're going to talk about Wicked and the design of Oz. Let's talk about Munchkinland. The first thing for me is like, okay, who are they? How can that influence the design? If they're farmers, what do they farm? And I proposed that we grow 9 million tulips in eastern England. And when you see a person run through them across a diagonal and you've got a camera up here, it's all real, it's all in camera. When I came to this project, my methodology is to try and do as much practically as possible. And the reason I was attracted to this is because it's pure fantasy, and which has traditionally recently been done with CGI. It's very difficult to talk to the studio and a room of producers about going into the farming business. Naturally, they want to do them with CGI, but they really wanted to know if I could guarantee the flowers would succeed, which of course you can't do. But on Interstellar, I grew 500 acres of corn far north in Canada, where the weather wasn't necessarily correct for corn growing, but it grew, it worked, so I knew it could be done. And I knew if I found the right farmer, like we had on Interstellar, we could make this work. So we, along with the help of a farmer called Mark and our location manager, Adam, we planted 9 million tulips. When I talk about practical filmmaking, the kind of things you learn can benefit and influence you. The journey to here is they plant tulips at this size, and then after the first harvest, they get to that size, and they actually chop the heads off the tulips and let the energy go into the bulb, and the flower grows, and then they harvest the bulbs, not the flowers. So that's why you get tulip festivals, because the first round, you get all these tulip heads. So to me, learning this process with the farmers, with the locals, means that it's like, oh great, I can then use them in Munchkinland. The other things you learn when you do things practically is these bulbs don't bloom at the same time as these ones. So you have to time out when you shoot it perfectly. So, but it's an adventure. Here's where CGI and visual effects come in. It's like we've got to put a village into this space. How do we do that? And John actually was the one who came with the idea that you actually sink the village into this landscape. Maybe you just see a few little roofs poking up. That's the CGI element. And then as they run towards this village, it suddenly sinks into the ground. So as they run from this landscape here, they appear here. And we can continue on running through the tulips. Here's a yellow brick road, which they can join and run into the village. And that is the link. I've got a great mixture here of imagery, both real, CGI, and that's where we started. So this is the concept illustration for Shiz. I needed to put it near enough that when Elphaba stands on a cliff edge and sings The Wizard and I, we can look out over this vast, impassable desert. So we went down to the south of England. This is actually near Bournemouth. This is actually in Sussex. So we found all these cliff edges and material, and then really had to sort of decide how Shiz would sit. The arrival at Shiz, let's talk about that for a second. We can't use cars because Oz doesn't have cars. We can't use hot air balloons to arrive there because that belongs to the wizard. We can't use the train because that belongs to the wizard also. We can't use horse and cart because the animals are free. Really, we're left with waterways and boats. So that's fine. We know in the south of England, near these cliffs, there's a beautiful winding river called the Seven Sisters, and it's landlocked, so it means we could put boats on it and it doesn't have current and it doesn't flow. So this is great news for filming. But the problem it raised was I needed to put the set in a huge water tank with enough tank that I could take the boat through the arch and introduce Shiz to the audience. This is a plan of the back lot build. This area here, all of this, is a huge water tank. The weight of water pushing against those tank walls is immense. We actually built more water tank, and the water tank went through here to the other side of the arch here, and then we built a sort of reservoir over here. So when you're in a boat coming this way, you would sail in. So you put the camera boat behind them and you follow them in, push through that arch and introduce Shiz, which was key for me. And then this is all physical. Here's the problem. I've got Glinda arriving here, full of luggage. I had 5 other boats and they've all got sails. So I've got to sail into here, land at the dock seamlessly and get off. We went to Prague to a boat builder to build us the big boats. We originally thought we'd put them on cables and pull them because they were pretty stable. We then needed to change the angle, so we ended up putting men in green suits, which visual effects will take out, pushing those boats. And once again, here's the joy of it. With CGI, that's what we should be doing, in my opinion. Everything is real, and we take out the people in green suits. So we take things out rather than add them. So now we're into the problem of, we got plus 4 feet of water. We need to land here at the dockside. So you're at plus 5. Then I need to go up to the steps of the courtyard, which means I've got another 10 feet here. And then I need to build the courtyard here, which is 35 feet. So you start adding up this and you're into 50 plus feet, which is pretty high for a set. Why, you might ask, why did I build that as part of this? It's because I don't want to cut from here to here. In practical filmmaking terms, I want to come in with characters into the inner courtyard because this is the transition space to Dr. Dillerman's, to the dining room, and this over here is the library. So it's extremely important to try and put these together. So when we do scenes looking this way, this acts as the backing and it's practical and it's real. I don't need CGI because I've got real physical backings to a certain height. So that means I can do transition shots, which in cinema is essential. If you want to feel the size of the world or the size of the space, you need to spend a moment showing some journeys. But let's talk about the architecture. This place was a seat of learning. It was an ancient establishment for Oz. And there's lots of pitfalls in designing an ancient school, and we've seen them. You've got Hogwarts, you've got Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, all these dark stone, sort of Gothic-y, medieval type places. And this place, John Chu was very important. This is where everyone wants to go, and it's a joyous place. And when you go into it, it has to be one of the most amazing places in Oz. So I knew I had to be light, I knew I had to be colorful again, I knew I had to be wondrous. So it was early on that I decided I'd take all my favorite old architecture. So Venetian staircases, onion domes, Gothic rooftops, balconies from Venice. I mean, there's Moorish architecture from Granada in here. There's, there's Indian stuff, that, the Pink Palace in India, blue tiles from Portugal. I wanted to combine these all, and it was like, can I actually combine them in a way that you believe they should all fit? Roxy, my great art director, spent many months trying to fit this all together to create this image. So she started to come up with ideas. We should take the Italian-esque towers and make them out of wood, change the materialities. They're familiar, but yet new. And in that way, the idea that we could put the audience into a place that was sort of familiar, but yet magical was the task. If you watch films and you have a sort of nostalgia to something you see, then you accept it. So it allows the audience to be part of it. And I was really, really trying to push that idea into this set. Now let's talk about what the build was, because here is the build on the back lot, which is by far the largest set I've ever built. I challenged my construction team of 20 years, who I knew were up for the job because they are amazing. So you can see the work. You can see where the tank is here. And you can see, we have to tank it, we have to concrete it, we have to then put liners in. We've got heavy equipment running. This is the only access. So once I put the tank liners in, I couldn't come in this way. So we would then leave this set part out, and we'd use huge cranes to lift machinery into this area so we could finish this facade. And this is why we've got this immense scaffolding rig to protect it. I haven't come across any other construction team that can do this. So here, I'm going up to 50 foot. Actually, I think it was like 52 feet at this point. The higher I got, the more in camera we could get. And what happens as the sun comes onto this front facade, you get all the colors and the detail, and so you understand what the light is doing, so you're not making it up. So when you go up here with CGI, the information is already down here because I've gone high enough that this is a repeat of detail. So this is the interior of the library that we designed. This set introduces Fiyero, Dances Through Life. And so he is this sort of the coolest character. Everyone wants to meet him. So we thought, well, maybe we should give him something wondrous to do in his first introduction. So if you've seen The Royal Wedding with Fred Astaire, you've seen the room that rotates and he dances on the walls and the ceiling. And it's just wondrous. I said to John, why don't we make circular bookshelves? What if they rotated it all in different directions so we could have him introduce Dancing Through Life on these rotating circular bookcases. And then the ladders would work independently. So at some point, when you look this way, they would line up and create a Z, which is Oz. So this is a shot that John Chu sent me of the dancers with the backlit window preparing to do a rehearsal on the ladders and the 3 rotating drums. So the way we've done things in the past is I give a phone call model to what the set is and how I'd like the drums to work to Paul Corbell, who ran special effects. And with his engineers, he'd go away and make a mock-up, which is 11 times smaller than the full-size one, with spinning drums and ladders. He would make that out of metal and mechanize it to figure out all the movements, all the joints, all the dangers. And so once we ironed out all those movements on the mock-up, there had to be a working physical model. Paul and his team could then start to roll the giant steel bands that would hold the bookshelves. And beyond the set, there are these sort of giant skateboard wheels that sort of move this thing around and back and forth. So here we have the soundstage set of Elphaba's and Glinda's dorm room. And we have a large number in here called Popular. And it's very difficult to stage and make interesting a song number in one room. So the challenge of this set was to create enough movement in the architecture to keep interest. And I'd been scouting the Brighton Pavilion. Brighton Pavilion was built in the early 1800s before Queen Victoria took the throne, so by the Prince Regent, who was the son of George III. He built this sort of Taj Mahal-looking palace down on the south coast. That is now a museum, but it's a remarkable piece of architecture and it's still standing. And so I went down there because it was probably one of the few places in England that I felt was Aussian, because it wasn't just Indian, it was a mix of Chinese architecture, Indian architecture. That was a way into what Shiz was going to become. And I'd been into one of the giant onion domes and I'd noticed these windows, and it occurred to me these were very Shizian and Aussian. And so we built these windows all over the set, and you'll see all these sort of what looks like plaster moldings in the ceiling here. So we had a full ceiling, but everything would come apart for lighting and camera. So these actually hide all the seams. So it was a giant sort of orange slice of a ceiling. So you could pull out all of that bit, leave this wall in here. You could pull out these windows because the camera had to get into this space to film the number. So here we have the concept illustration of the Emerald City. The Wizard of Oz is an American fairy tale, and so I really needed to have a sort of slice of Americana in the film. And I was looking back at the White City in Chicago that was built for the Great Exhibition. And if we look back at the White City in Chicago, it was a time of, electricity. It was the time of the future. It was a palace they built. They built this incredible place, Burnham, Sullivan, and all the architects that were involved. Everyone wanted to go there. Millions of people wanted to go there. But it was, ironically, because they had to go so quickly with the White City, they had to build it all with plaster and wood and not in stone. There were only a couple of buildings that were in stone. So it was an illusion as well, which I think also relates to our character, the wizard. Everything is an illusion. Here's the backlot. You can see the inspiration from the 1893 Waltz exhibition. And what I love about this is Sullivan's great arch that he built was actually the transportation building. So I love the fact we built an Aussian train in the transportation arch. By the time we got to Emerald City, it was beginning to run out of money. So I had to reuse everything I had. And then you can see how we were doing it. We were going to sculpt and mold all these tiles that we could then use on every surface of the back lot. There's some here. The roof of this isn't just flat, it's got texture. And so when the light hits it, it moves, so it feels like it has depth. So it's very important to avoid flat walls in back lots. So this is the second part of the Emerald City backlot, which is Wizardmania, which is behind this arch, and the front gates or doorway of the Wizard's Palace. You can see the multi-use of Emerald City tiles going on here. So every surface I really wanted to cover, so there was interest everywhere. But these columns, you'll see them in the Great Hall. I really wanted to reuse every piece of architecture I had made for the interior sets on the palace. Here we have the Great Hall, and really this is a room of intimidation before you meet the wizard. I really wanted to play with scale here. So one of the first things I looked at is these sort of giant windows that sort of, again, have enormous depth and step in. And definitely I was influenced by people like Carlo Scarpa with this kind of his sort of love of circles in his concrete architecture. Here's one of my windows. This is a shot John Chu took on set, and it really just gives you the scale of my Aussian windows. And here's our wonderful camera crew. And so you can see the distances and depth. And here are the columns. Now, the reason I added the columns is because I really wanted to make the room feel enormous. So as you walk down here, the columns force you into a longer perspective, even though the room is wider. I need to talk about art direction. So here you have the building of this Great Hall, and this is also why I like to do things practically. There's art direction and art directors. You have to manipulate the set and change it so it becomes something better than the concept to the finished product. It's like a piece of sculpture. You must see it and change it and analyze it. So we initially painted everything green, and I remember being with my head painter saying, wow, this looks terrible. So now, one thing you'll note here is you're seeing navies, you're seeing orange gold, you're seeing bronze, you're seeing many colors. And so again, I'm trying to create definition so you understand it. So I needed to break it up. It couldn't just have green. So you'll see that although the overall image is green, there are many colors in the Emerald City. And now we've left the Great Hall and we've gone into the Wizard's throne room. The main feature is the Wizard's head, which is a theme in all the films and in Wicked. Firstly, I wanted to puppeteer a head mechanically, and I knew Paul Coolbort and his special effects team could do it because he'd done flying miniatures, Heinkel's for me on Dunkirk. So I knew he was a talented group of people. And he had a puppeteer with him, and so this is a working, practical puppeteered head up here. This is all in camera, there's no digital work here. This is actually behind the scenes here is this giant pivot arm attached to the ceiling, so we could lower and raise the head and push it in, because it has to appear somehow. You can't just open the curtains. It has to be more dramatic than that. The great and terrible. It's 15 foot of head puppeteered, but then you're 8 feet off the ground here, and then the arm goes all the way up to 40 feet. So the mechanics of it were, complicated. And then really I'd been to the Deer Beacon to see a lot of string art, and it occurred to me that we should, instead of making a traditional theater curtain, we should do it out of these layers of string, which would then become velvet curtain pieces. And we'd do this huge depth, so about 20 feet worth of different colored greens, going from sort of green to yellows to blues. There are all kinds of people behind the scenes pulling on little wires to open up the curtain so the puppeteer, his face expressions wouldn't get stuck. And then the big movement of the head was done by the hydraulic guys at the back. It was like a stage show that we had to achieve every single take. Here we have the concept of the mat room. Once we get past the wizard's puppeteer head and he comes out and he greets Elphaba and Glinda, he then shows them his map room. And originally it was just a separate set. And I thought, well, it'd be lovely to do a map room sort of mural or something that was part of the throne room. And then it was like, well, we could also do an illusion here, because the wizard's an illusionist. So you walk up thinking it's a painting, and then it lights up and he actually steps over into it. So it's a 3-dimensional map of Oz. John was in love with that, and he just says, yeah, let's step into it. My sort of inspiration was when I was on Dunkirk, the film Dunkirk. We were filming in Dunkirk, and we'd have Sundays off. There wasn't a ton to do in Dunkirk, so I used to go to the art museum. It was about the history of Dunkirk and the shipping and the ports. And someone had made these sort of historical vignettes in 3D. They're only 4 inches deep, but everything was forced down, so the perspectives were painted and forced. So when you stood in front of them, it looked like they went off like a real model, but actually they were shallow. So that sort of fascinated me, and that really gave me the inspiration for this, how we might achieve this. So it occurred to me that we could do a sort of forced perspective map, a real miniature with a sky in 3 dimensions. And this was quite an undertaking, and you need a bit of optimism for it. But I've built lots of miniatures, so I knew we could get some great people to build the miniatures. But here, the horizon, I have a wonderful scenic painter called David Packard, who can pretty much paint anything. And so, you know, this is an egg shape. So, you know, the section of it is actually like that. There's the skyline, and this would be a forced perspective. So the clouds would get bigger and bigger, and it would collapse on itself. So the landscape would then be sculpted and get bigger and bigger to the Emerald City. And of course, John then wants to do a dance number inside the map. He loves to like amp it up, and he wants it to go from day to night. So it was like, okay, so this is a solid egg shape for day, that's painted, and it's lit through a little trough behind here. And then it lifts, and behind it is a scrim, a night scrim, which is a sort of a gauze that you paint on, which means you can backlight it. And when you backlight it, you can see the night sky. And Jeff Goldblum dances in front of the night sky. And then John wanted to get behind the backing and get him in silhouette and have a moon that floats across. So you end up again with a sort of a large stage show in a physical set. And you can start to see it here. There's our actors looking at it. So you can start to see, and you can see the shadowing because, you know, where Jeff Goldblum has to enter and exit. And when you see it on film, I think it's quite magical.